Whenever I'd pass under a bridge on any of my sailboats, I always felt sorry for the people driving over the bridge. I remember working and driving over bridges, and I'd look down into the water. And I don't just want to be on some adventure somewhere, but yeah, that every time I drove under a bridge, I would think about myself driving across that bridge in the past, just going through the daily grind of things, and yeah, I feel sorry for them. And I know most of them probably weren't as miserable as I was with all of that, but that's how I felt, and I was the wealthiest person in the world, whether I was on a 5-day trip or a 3-month trip. I mean, I'm sure there was millionaires driving over that bridge, and I was wealthier, no doubt in my mind anyway. I always had a hard time fitting into that system of things. I remember back in the late 90s, I was driving a truck at the time, like 600 miles a day. I'd gotten a CDL and I was making good money. I was home every night, but I used to go over and over this riddle because I hated every job I'd get. I mean, to the point where I would just throw it all away. I didn't even care. And I'd find something else. I got pretty good at getting jobs. And yeah, so I just could never do it. But I had this riddle I would go over in my head over and over again. I don't know if it's really a riddle. It's a saying. Everybody's probably heard it. Something to the effect of find what you love and make it your job or your career, I guess. And I used to go over and over that thinking, well, that's it. If I figure that out, I got it. And the thing is, I would just circle back to, I don't love any job or career or anything I could turn into that. And if I did turn it into that, it would probably ruin it. I got that way about being on the water after I became a 100-ton captain and I was making a little bit of money on the water. I had to remind myself that I got into that only to learn how to navigate so I could take off in my boat, not for a career or anything, And it was tough because you start working and then that's your daily grind. And I got feeling like, well, this is going to ruin, the water for me. And maybe it wouldn't have. And it was probably the handiest thing to do. And think about it for days, well, I got to find this thing that I can turn into my job and I got to love it. And maybe that'll work for me. That'll be my ticket. And, when I kind of figured something out, but I never figured out an answer to that. But I remember thinking one day, after months of going over that, like, well, what if it had nothing to do with a job or making money? What would I want to be doing? If it didn't involve buying a bunch of material things, like, where would I want to be? What would I be doing? And then things started kind of coming to, right away I was like, well, I'd be on a beach somewhere under a palm tree or coconut tree probably. And I thought, well, that's not going to pay very good, So, I don't know. I started getting into like, how can I create a passive income so I can support myself while I was sailing? And I came pretty close to that. And that, I got to do some long trips by trying to achieve that passive income. I got to do some extended trips. I always had to move to vacation spots. And that kind of did it for me. It would extend my time where I could just do a kind of daily grind thing. And, that's something, too, I'm not proud of. I fought it my whole life. I'm not going to fight it anymore. I'm going to be 57. And I just decided recently, I'm just going to roll with it. And whatever that is, if it's God's will, instinct, Mother Nature, whatever that drive, whoever put it in me, I'm just going to go with it now. And because I've been fighting it my whole life, that really didn't work. It depends on how you would measure success and, how do you measure it? Because I had some things. I had new cars, new motorcycles, stuff like that. decent houses, have one brand new house. I mean, is that success? Because I was miserable. I mean, beyond belief. I don't know what made me keep doing that. I guess just thinking that that's what is expected of me. So I'll do that. It was about 5 years ago. I changed like all my social medias to occupation adventurer, and I put. I even did it on LinkedIn. You know, one thing I'll mention that I also started doing about 5 years ago. You ever have people? Well, most people. I mean, I think it's just making small talk. But when you meet somebody and you say, how do you do? And they say, well, what do you do? You know, it's just natural. They're trying to make conversation, but it's such a loaded question too. I mean, it's how much do you make, you know, ballpark, you know, do you have a title? Should I respect you? I mean, there's so much into that question. And so I got really tired of just meaningless small talk, especially work, shop talk. I just became totally uninterested, like to the point where I couldn't even fake it and play along anymore, which is what everybody else does. Yeah. So I started saying, when they say, what do you do? I say, I'm an adventurer. And sometimes, you know, they'd laugh or something. Sometimes they would say, oh, me too, I have a fishing boat or something. And it would lead into great conversation. Or they'd say, well, you know, it would get to the bottom of what they're really after. You know, they'd say, well, I hope that, or something to the effect of that probably doesn't pay very well, but in a more polite way. You know, oh, how does that pay? Or are you able to make a living, you know, in a jokingly way? In other words, I'm asking you how much you make. Are you not going to tell me? But yeah, so I just got tired of it. So I just said, I'm an adventurer. And then if they did say something like, well, how does that pay or something, you know, I would just go into my last adventure. I'd say something like, well, I have a job, but, and then I'd just go into whatever I did last, you know, whether, even if it was 4 or 5 years ago, you know, some kayak trip or something. Yeah, and I'd tell them all about that. And then we'd have interesting conversations because, like I said, they'd have a fishing boat or they'd have other things they do that aren't their job too, which it is the whole reason that question bothered me, is because I'm not my job or career, never wanted to be. I wish I could have been that, but I couldn't have been, so wasn't an option. So to me, it's asking, you know, who are you? And well, you want to talk sailing or going off grid? I mean, I'll do that all day. So let's talk. But yeah, it's just something kind of funny I started doing. I started doing it at work functions too, which I don't know. I never had a big problem with it. Most people just laugh. Anyway, take care. I'll make another one of these.